Okay, welcome back, everyone, for the live intersectoral panel that opens a forward-looking conversation on the role of partnerships in strengthening the contribution of collections and collections-based organizations to sustainable development across all its pillars. So now I'm delighted to introduce to you our panelists for this conversation, and I kindly ask them to switch on their cameras. So we'll have Julia Pagel, Secretary General of the Network of European Museum Organizations, NEMO, who will be sharing not the perspective from the museums networks. Then we'll have with us Tim Kong, the Digital Experience Manager at the Parliamentary Service in New Zealand, bringing, among other things, his experience in developing partnerships to implement the Pacific Virtual Museum project that empowers people in and off the Pacific Islands, enabling them to see, discover, and explore items of digitized cultural heritage that are held in collections around the world. We are also very pleased to have with us Fackson Banda, Chief of UNESCO's Unit for Documentary Heritage, contributing his expertise and experience in how partnerships support UNESCO's Memory of the World program and other initiatives. We also have with us today Johanna Leissner, the scientific representative of the Fraunhofer Society in Germany, whose expertise and experience includes the EIT Culture and Creativity Initiative by the European Institute of Innovation and Technology, and institutional partnerships dedicated to helping European cultural and creative sectors and industries to become more sustainable, then fostering interdisciplinary and cross-cultural collaboration, building new connections, and creating opportunities for stakeholders to innovate and deliver meaningful impact. Today, we also have the special participation of Marta Calì, the Senior Policy Advisor at the Joint SDG Fund. Marta brings to the conversation her experience and insights in providing high-level strategic advice across all areas of work of the SDG Fund, including interagency matters, program management, and partnerships, as well as investment strategies across priority thematic areas. This is very important for the conversation today as we are talking about the contribution of collections and collections-based organizations to support the SDGs. You can find our panelists' full biography on the conference website. And to moderate the panel, I'm delighted to invite back Beatriz Rasco, the Executive Director of Apoio Online and also co-organizer of this conference. Beatriz's extensive experience in forging and sustaining partnerships across the heritage sector and beyond, and combined with her deep commitment to inclusion and collaboration, I think it makes her the ideal guide for today's conversation. So Beatriz, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, José Luis, for this so kind introduction and for inviting me to moderate this panel. I'm truly honored to be among those amazing panelists. It has been an extraordinary week with inspiring, thought-provoking conversations, presentations, highlighting the global challenges and opportunities to foster intersectoral collaboration around heritage collections. And the importance of partnership actually has been mentioned several times during the week in the sessions of people, planet, prosperity, and peace. And today we have the opportunity to dig deeper in this session entirely dedicated to partnership and reflect on, for instance, how do we build global intersectoral partnerships that truly last? How can collections and collections-based organizations not just participate, but actively strengthen these collaborations? And also, how can non-collections-based institutions intersect meaningfully with heritage collections to create mutual value? So I look forward to our panelists' conversations today, sharing their insights and experiences. So I would like to start by asking all of you, from your perspective, from your sector, how do you see the role of collections and collections-based organizations in today's global efforts and for sustainable development? And if collections-based projects are part of the scope of your partnerships, for example. So if I may start, for example, Julia, from your perspective, right? From NEMO, encompassing over 30,000 museums, What are your thoughts?
Hello, everybody, first of all, and thank you again for inviting me. Yeah, I mean, with NEMO, we, as you said, we represent the museum community and we advocate for museums as being those essential actors in societal transformation, whether it's through education, sustainability, digital innovation, civic engagement. And especially now in these critical times, museums are trusted places providing well-researched information, really helping to cultivate critical thinking and empathy. And I think museums are becoming more important in their social functions than ever. But I might be a bit biased because, of course, I love museums. So with NEMO, we've been advocating a lot for museums' power to contribute to the sustainable development goals. And from my experience, I think the most impactful or powerful initiatives were actually the ones that were done in collaboration and cross-sectoral partnerships.
Thank you, Julia. Indeed, indeed. Team, from your perspective as an educator and also digital experience manager, what do you think?
Kia ora koutou, everyone. Nissan Bolivanaka. Thank you for having me along as well. I'm joining from almost midnight here in Aotearoa, so it's lovely to be in the conversation. I think for me, in the pieces of work that I've led, partnership is about understanding that there are vast communities, and I was just reflecting on in the previous talks about the Indigenous focus, particularly from the UNDP programs. There are vast communities that have no knowledge of museums or archives or the worlds of libraries and galleries, and I think that the real challenge is how do we, within these institutions, step out to meet those communities? How do we build bridges to those communities? How do we welcome them in? And allow them to be in our spaces in ways that are safe, in ways that are caring, and in ways that enable them to walk through these worlds, because very often we hold many of their items or the items of their heritage and their people, and they don't know how they got there. And I think that's a really powerful opportunity for our institutions to start to flip maybe what it means to be in relationship in terms of welcoming Indigenous people in.
How do you see this happening? So what's the practical tip you have so that it can help us make this happen, to engage those communities?
Sorry, was that for me?
Tim, yes, I was following up.
Sorry.
For you.
Sorry. No, I think one of the things is to build. So, for example, Digital Pacific, which is the project I led, we built that to work for people who A, didn't know museums existed, and B, only had mobile phones and were also in low network environments. And so we built it to load fast, and we built it to load in ways that meant they could make sense of these worlds. It also meant that we were going to meet them where they were and to understand the environments they lived in, they worked in, very often in the Pacific experience. Cultural heritage priorities are well down the list of priorities for nations and funding. And so to understand, I think when we traveled to one island and we were told that the museum had a gigabyte of data per month, and anything outside of that they would have to pay for on their personal accounts. And so you understand that reality, you start to think differently around digital access and digitized access, and you have to start think differently around how you make these connections available to people.
Thank you, Tim, very much. That is a very important insight as well. Fackson, moving to you from the UNESCO perspective and your involvement with the Memory of the World initiative, what are your thoughts?
Yes, well, based on our experience, we believe that sort of heritage collections and collections-based organizations already make vital contributions to sustainable development in various ways. For example, as learning hubs, museums, libraries, and archives safeguard and provide access to knowledge accumulated over generations, such as traditional practices, scientific data, as well as cultural expressions that are essential for addressing today's challenges. For example, climate resilience and food security. A more practical example for us is our work around incorporating the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction in memory institutions' emergency preparedness plans. And we've got some funding dedicated to that as well through what we call the Global Initiative to Safeguard Documentary Heritage at Risk. But also going beyond that, we believe that memory institutions, along with their collections, empower marginalized voices by documenting their experiences and ensuring inclusivity in development narratives. In many countries, collections-based institutions drive cultural tourism as well, and we have worked with several of them, not least in Saudi Arabia, where we've got a project focusing on Alula as a tourist destination, along with the mountain inscriptions in that area. And partnerships, we would like to contend, are key, to all this, to try to amplify these contributions. For example, collaboration with governments helps align memory institutions with national development strategies, and we try to work with governments within the framework of what we call the 2015 recommendation concerning the preservation of and access to documentary heritage, including in digital form. But also we've got civil society partnerships that support advocacy and community engagement, while we also have private sector partnerships that bring in technological innovation, funding, and new platforms for outreach. For example, we've got a relationship with the Calì Foundation, working with Wikimedia in order to get a team of volunteers trained to report on documentary heritage that is inscribed on the Memory of the World International Register, thereby increasing its potential for dissemination. We also have a strategic partnership with Google Arts and Culture, where they give us their platform, and we provide them with the content by way of inscribed documentary heritage. So these partnerships are key in trying to ensure that we contribute to SDGs in some fashion or other. Now, we can't say which SDGs we are directly, contributing to, but we can say that we are assisting in actualizing the commitments made with respect to promoting public access to information, broadening fundamental freedoms in the cultural ecosystem, but also in terms of targets looking at the protection of cultural heritage, in this case documentary heritage within memory institutions, and beyond that also targets focusing on the provision of quality education, especially if you link some of our initiatives with ASPINET. This is the UNESCO Associated Schools Network, to feature documentary heritage in teaching and learning. So yeah, that's about how much we are doing.
Thank you, Fackson. And thank you also for the examples of practical collaborations with the collections involved. And I would like then to move to Johanna. Johanna, from the perspective of the European Union as a funder, so how
Yes.
the role of the collections can be increased and those partnerships can become more sustainable.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to this important conference. And as you just said, the European Union is really doing a lot to enhance resilience of cultural heritage, including, of course, collections. And right now we have been publishing a report. No, it was 3 years ago. It was about how can cultural heritage become more resilient in times of climate change. And this report really has received a worldwide attention. and also was the initiative for the European Union together with the member states, where not only European member states can take part, but also partners, for example, from Egypt. It is a new program. It is called Resilient Cultural Heritage, and it will start probably next year in 2026. And there will be funding over 200 million euro over 7 years. And there will be dedicated calls. And I just want to stress that we still need research. I mean, of course, we need partnerships, but there are still a lot of research questions, how we can make our collections really resilient and safe in times of climate change and also other threats from geopolitical changes. So I would like really to put the strength and the focus on the research. And up to now, there have been also a lot of EU research projects dealing with this topic, green museums, green collections. And I would encourage every one of you to look into the publications of the EU, of DG Research, where all this research is published. And it was also the program of the European Institute of Technology, where we are dealing with culture and creativity. And even here, we also have a strategic topic group, Cultural Heritage, where we look into in the coming calls, how we can strengthen partnerships also beyond Europe, because that was also mentioned in the OMC report, Climate Change and Cultural Heritage, that we have to expand our cooperation outside Europe. And here I really would like to encourage everyone to look into these new calls, also from the EIT Culture and Creativity, together also partnerships not only with research institutions, with all kinds of stakeholders, and also extending it to companies, because we need companies who, for example, produce innovative materials, methodologies, how we can sustainably manage our collections. And we need, and museums and archives need a lot of energy to have stable indoor conditions. And here we really need sustainable solutions, how we can drop the energy demand and make our indoor environments and indoor climates much more sustainably friendly. And especially Europe is facing, Europe is warming twice as fast as other parts of the world. And here we are not really yet accustomed to higher temperatures, to long heat waves. And there we need cooling, and cooling is still something which is very energy intensive and not CO2 friendly. So here we still have a lot of problems which need to be accompanied by innovative research, not only in Europe, but from all over the world, because we cannot reinvent the wheel everywhere. So we need cooperation, and we can learn from each other. And that is my message. Invest in research and cooperation, because we cannot lose time. Thank you.
Thank you, Johanna. Thank you for your insight. Then I would like then to move to Marta. Marta, from the SDG Fund perspective, right? So we are talking about sustainable development. So please enlighten us with your thoughts.
Thank you so much, and it's really a privilege to join this panel today. And I listen with a lot of interest to the other panelists, because we at the Joint SDG Fund, we do not have a specific focus on collection. So I'm definitely not an expert like the other colleagues on the panel. But of course, we have SDG, the SDGs at the core of our mandate. So it's extremely relevant to the role of culture and the role of cultural institutions, and collection-based organizations is absolutely central to the to sensitizing and engaging the public and other institutions, and creating collaborations to promote the SDGs. So we do perfectly understand it in the context of everything that, for instance, Fackson explained before, talking about knowledge hubs, platform for community and knowledge transmissions around the SDGs, as heritage preservation, as one of our colleagues before from UNDP was talking about, referring to some of our programs, for instance, in Colombia or in Costa Rica, and of course, Apoyo. As anchor of resilience, also in terms of in times of conflict, in times of climate disruptions, or with an important contribution also to agendas such as disaster risk reduction, as Fackson also was saying, and as labs for innovation, forward thinking, future thinking, which is also a core part of our work across the system. The foresight and futures thinking is increasingly shaping the way in which we design programmatic interventions, and at least we also try to bring it increasingly into national development planning and partnerships with government. And I would say also, importantly, in the spirit of multilateralism, another element that I think clearly arises from this panel is like-minded institutions across borders that promote a certain understanding of sustainable developments, of engaging citizens on the key issues of our time, sensitize around climate, provide an opportunity of cross-border engagement, global engagement around these issues for youth and other people that would be, and different parts of the populations that would be normally left behind, not engaged in the conversation. So there's so many absolutely critical aspects and values of this work for the SDGs. Now, when it comes to the Joint SDG Fund, and I should have probably started with that, we work through the United Nations development system on the ground. So we are a pooled fund system of the United Nations, of the development system in particular, a flagship mechanism that is really linked to the reform of the UN that sees the resident coordinators as empowered to build these partnerships and convene these partnerships, rather at country level, bringing the UN development agencies together. So a lot of what I could talk about is really the work that UNDP, UNESCO, UNICEF, all the entities of the UN could be doing together in this area to support government. So in alignment with national development strategies, in alignment enshrined in the UN national cooperation frameworks, sustainable cooperation frameworks, but really in partnership with governments. So we provide a tool for partnership. We provide a tool for convening, and of course, also catalytic resources. And there are two important aspects that I would like to highlight, maybe are really specific to our mandate and are specific to the type of partnerships we build as a tool, again, of the UN system, but that do not see at the moment collections at the center of our strategies, which is policy and financing. These two aspects, how can we influence policy? How can we create feedback loops for policy change? So something that is sustainable beyond one initiative, one program, but that really has an impact on the development of sustainable policies around, for instance, cultural institutions. And the financing element, how do we bring partnerships that are catalytic to then mobilizing also financing in all these important areas that were highlighted by colleagues on the panel?
Thank you, Marta. And this is really important. So how we can now be together with the collections and fundings, and as you said, sustainable policies and finance elements. So we all are aware of how to approach that. So we do have, for example, a question here on the Q&A, and I will address that. For example, how we do ensure that funding is being distributed and redistributed equitably. So how does this work?
This is a question for me still.
Yes.
In which way? The funding distributed equitably across?
Yeah, so how can we, what we need to do to ensure that the fundings are distributed equitably, ensuring that's the question, not concentrated with certain institutions or disconnected from the very communities.
Yes, I understand.
Those are represented.
So, I mean, this goes to the core of what, it's how do we design partnerships, right? It's The approach of the Joint SDG Fund is, again, grounded on building sustainable partnerships with, we collaborate with governments to begin with, through the UN country teams. But in the design of these partnerships, there needs to be, and in bringing together all these multiple stakeholders that are now increasingly part of the development landscape, philanthropies, private sector, development financing institutions, banks, and then the actors that are leading in those different thematic areas in which we work across the SDGs. There needs to be an element of co-creation, which ensures also that the different voice of the relevant actors are included. And there need to be elements, again, of policy design. We can for sure have single initiatives and projects that focus on exhibitions, on training, on creating a particular hub. But this siloed project approach is not one that leads to this element of sustainability and equity and inclusion. So in order to have that equitable, inclusive approach, there needs to be more of a deliberate design of, again, policy frameworks and initiatives that are grounded in partnerships, that are grounded in plans, that are grounded in a vision, that are consulted, that are, when we bring in the voice of civil society, of all the different actors. Again, this is a context-specific approach. This is an approach that varies, there's no specific blueprint. There is this notion of multi-stakeholder partnership that is brokered by and convened by the resident coordinators, again, our UN ambassadors at country level through the UN country teams that work jointly and try to provide this best offer to governments on these different fields, including the one of culture. And then there is another aspect, which is how culture, even if we were not talking about designing programmatic interventions that are centered on promoting collections, for instance, or that see collections as critical actors, there could be other aspects of other forms of other types of programs. So for instance, we have several in livelihoods and craft economies, for instance, or in food heritage and sustainable agriculture. Like I'm thinking about some of our programs in the small island development states where, culture is also about preserving ancestral knowledge in agriculture to tackle climate change and resilience, or in post-conflict settings in collective memory, social reconciliation. So there could be like a variety of areas in which culture and what comes from collections also influence the design of a program. So it's a different issue than having a program that is centered, or initiatives and policies that are centered on those institutions, but leveraging the power of those actors into the design of programs that tackle other areas, from food to climate, energy, etc., which are the areas where the fund typically engages. But this element of equity and inclusion is in the principle of leave no one behind, which is exactly what informs UN development programs at country level.
Thank you, Marta. Thank you. It's very good to understand more in depth what the details are and how we can engage, which is actually a good segue for our next question, because the next question is about the future. Is a looking ahead question, right? So if we look to the future here, I would like to ask all my fellow panelists, how can we further strengthen the role and the recognition of collections and collections-based organizations in the partnership sector, in your sector, and with your experience? What would it take concretely to make this happen and make these partnerships sustainable and effective? And I would like to open the floor, see who would like to start.
I can give it a start.
Thank you, Julia.
Yeah, I would maybe like to come back to the fact that from a perspective of the sector, we have the feeling that especially on political level, it's sometimes very difficult to recognize the value of these partnerships, as some of the main outcomes of partnerships are often intangible, right? Like trust and access and shared learning. So what I would argue for is us needing to put a stronger focus on the sometimes hidden values of partnerships, if you want to call it like this, like information exchange, building trust, capacity building, the policy influence, but also community resilience at the end. And when I think about it, then I think this is the structural challenges that a lot of these partnerships, and I could have named many between museums and health organizations, between museums and tech organizations, between museums and social organizations, but most of these partnerships are funded through short-term projects. And this limits the ability to scale, to sustain, to deliver long-term impact. And I think we really need that shift from short-term project funding to long-term institutional support when it comes to partnerships and collaboration, because cross-sectoral partnerships really require time to build trust, to develop shared goals, and to return on this investment that funding organizations are often speaking about. So yes, my recommendation would be for the future to recognize funded partnerships as strategic and not as supplementary.
Thank you, Julia. So, Tim or Fackson? Fackson, you have your microphone off. Go ahead.
Yes, indeed, if I may step in. From our perspective, the first point is to stress greater policy and visibility, and I think Marta has done a good job of highlighting the necessity of appropriate policy designs. From the point of view of documentary heritage collections, we think this is overlooked in national and international development frameworks, despite evident contributions to education, innovation, and resilience, and so on and so forth. So practically speaking, one could envision integrating into SDG reporting frameworks notions of how documentary heritage can catalyze debate, for example, because it is in the end information, knowledge that is encoded in documentary heritage. How can we use archives to catalyze discussion on issues of sustainable development? How can we encourage our member states to include contributions from museums, libraries, and archives within their voluntary national reviews, for example, on SDG progress? I think that would be important. But also working with regional organizations such as the African Union, the European Union, the Arab League. I think we need to strengthen this. We haven't done a good job of it as the member of the World Secretariat, and our aim is to try to strengthen these partnerships, but also to try to ensure that cultural policies explicitly link collections to education, to climate action, to social inclusion, to innovation, in a sense, positioning collections not just under culture, but across ministries of education, of the environment, of tourism, of digital transformation, and so on. Another area that we think is important is to build institutional capacity through training, through resource mobilization, through technical support. I did refer to our global initiative to safeguard documentary heritage at risk. That's one such initiative. And there are several other funding streams that we've identified to support memory institutions, particularly in Africa and small island and developing states. Another issue, of course, is focusing on innovative intersectoral partnerships, and I think this has been dealt with. For example, we are working with an organization called INRIA here in France, which focuses on software heritage. To what extent can we ensure the archiving and protection of software source code as a factor of sustainable development? Because in the end, our world is built into, arises out of software source code. Even if you talk about digitalizing, documentary heritage, that in the end has its basis in software source code. So we think this is something that can be treated as documentary heritage for sustainable development, and therefore worthy of preservation, of dissemination, and even of being embedded within the larger development agenda of our member states. I think there are several other things that one can focus on, not least, if I may end on this point, supporting community-centered partnerships where local people are supported to co-curate and co-manage heritage, ensuring that sustainability efforts foster social cohesion. And we've got a project in Pakistan, Citizens Archives, that we can point to with respect to that. I think that's pretty much it.
In fact, I think we have a follow-up question on from the audience for you. That your examples shared collaborations north and south, but are there examples of Pan-African initiatives or collaborations between marginalized communities or collections across different contexts that you would like to highlight and share?
Well, we do have some partnerships between Portuguese-speaking countries in Africa and Latin American, Caribbean region. And the idea there is to support them to identify documentary heritage that they think they could motivate for inscription on the Memory of the World International Register. It is documentary heritage that is embedded in their histories, in their shared histories, if you will, on the basis of language, on the basis of culture, and so on and so forth. But also we are focusing on indigenous peoples and their documentary heritage, and also the indigenous languages which carry some of this heritage, and the fact that there are at risk of dying. So the idea is, how can you get oral testimonies digitized so that they are preserved, as an audiovisual record. There is that happening not only in Africa, but also in Asia, including in New Zealand and Australia with the First Nations. Those are some of the examples that I can give.
Thank you, Fackson, very much. So, team, Johanna, would you like to share some insights?
No, I just had 2 points, I think. I was thinking a little bit of what Julie had said around partnership. And I think for Pacific people, particularly Polynesian people, there's a concept called the VA. And the VA is the space between people, the space between places, and the spaces between things. And Tuilava is to maintain that connection. And I think that's a really critical way to approach this, because partnership is about relationship, and relationships are really hard. I think someone was saying earlier, how do we think intergovernmentally or between nations? The reality is, and I can only speak from my country, that most of our libraries and archives are domestic-facing institutions. And so it is a real challenge to think beyond our own borders. So I would put that there. I think the other challenge, and I appreciate that this panel and this conference is a predominantly, as I understand it, European, North American facing conference and event. But the reality for yourselves as institutions, if you choose to be in a relationship with Pacific peoples, is that for vast numbers of Pacific people, our land will be gone in the next 100 years. That is not a made-up reality. That is just what we are facing already. I have stood on the beaches of my father's island and known that that will be gone by the time my children are old enough. So my challenge to you is, if you wish to be in a relationship and a partnership, how do you choose to be in a relationship and a partnership with a people whose culture and whose land will not exist in the next 100 years? That is a big ask. because that is not about repatriation. There is no point in repatriating items to lands which will not exist. We have to think differently about what those relationships mean, what it is to, as I said earlier, open the doors to our institutions to people who don't know you exist, who don't know that you hold things of theirs and their people. And equally, I think my second reflection is in a digital world, everything as soon as it's digitized is data and it is IP. As soon as it's digitized, it becomes consumable. We know who's coming after that. That's OpenAI, that's Meta, that's Amazon, that's Google. As soon as it's taken there, it is no longer ours. The most heartbreaking story I've heard this year is of a small group in Nepal who through COVID were doing, to save their language, were doing translation of their language and recording it down. And they were using Google Translate as their source base. So they were literally giving their language, their culture to Google and to Alphabet. As soon as we do that with our cultures, they are no longer ours. If we want to look differently at relationships, if we want to think about cultural heritage and what it means in a digital world, those are the two biggest things I would suggest we need to be paying attention to. Thank you.
Following up this question, what should we do or start doing or keep doing? What should we do?
I think one of the challenges, and I use the phrase preservation as practice. I think we often think about preservation as the end goal. In the Pacific, we talk increasingly, and it's been used a number of times in here, so it's not unique to us, but of safeguarding and the handing down of language, the handing down of ways of preparing food, the handing down of ways of telling story, and literally the passing down of stories. I always reflect on when we gather to tell stories, everyone walks away with a different version of that story, and that's what keeps it alive. Whether that's a recipe, whether that's a song, whether it's a performance, whether a dance. Preservation, I think, for most of our institutions is how we build and build, as was mentioned earlier, our HVAC systems. We have to shift our default model of actually preserving everything to what is it to maintain and safeguard so that the knowledge is handed down. And that's often written and that's often digital and so forth. But what is it to continue to have it in multiple places, in multiple versions, told and retold, so that it endures beyond a place. In a very real terms, Papua New Guinea National Museum and Art Gallery, their HVAC system failed about 6 months ago. The vast majority of their collections are biological. That site is, and still believe it is, closed because it is no longer habitable by humans. And in that, all of their collections are gone as well. These are the realities. The other small story I have from the last 3 or 4 months was the FSM Parliament Library burning to the ground. There's only one fire engine on that island, and by the time it got there, everything was gone. That is a huge challenge when the entire cultural state, legal knowledge of that nation state is gone. How do we rebuild that? How do you start again? We have to keep looking for the ways to preserve and hand on, but also to safeguard and hand on as well.
And as you said, going beyond our institutional borders, right? Thank you for the insight. Johanna, I would like to ask you, for your insight. So how can we strengthen those collections-based organizations and the partnerships, and what we need to make this happen? And also going into more specific conservation questions from the audience, right? So what do you see? How can collections managers understand the importance of standards or necessary standards to preserve the memory?
Yeah, let me first come back to what Julia Pagel said. I think we cannot leave out the responsibility that we need an institutional funding scheme. And that is very important. And we need stable political framework conditions and policies where cultural heritage is embedded. Otherwise, we will not see any budgets allocated to this topic. And if we do not have a stable budget allocated for these tasks, I mean, we have just heard it from our colleague, Tim, it will not happen. We will not be able to have cooperation. We will not be able to look into all different details. What are the answers? Where can we find the answers? anywhere else in the world. So this is very important. And what I see now in times of climate change and unstable political conditions, that the state and the governments are withdrawing more and more from their responsibility for the protection of cultural heritage. And it is the responsibility of member states, of governments, of the states to reserve a budget for the protection of cultural heritage. And this cannot be transferred only to private initiatives. Yes, we need private initiatives, we need public-private partnerships, but we cannot let governments and states get out of their responsibility for cultural heritage. And that is true for everywhere in the world, because it's our archives, it's our collections, which also provide access to the truth. When we see what's happening now with kind of fake news, if we do not have our written documents, if we do not have our tangible heritage, which can give the access what really happened in the past and how we can study and nurture discussions, we will be completely lost. And for this, I think there are enough international meetings, G7, G20, the United Nations. I think these are the bodies and institutions where the topic needs to be discussed, and where they can make claims to encourage the countries, the states, and the governments to work together, and also to allocate funding and long-term funding, because our heritage, we see it now, what's happening in the Ukraine, in Gaza, in many other parts of the world. When there are wars, when there are conflicts, one of the first targets is also our cultural heritage, and that destroys the identity of people. And we need I think cultural heritage is a socio-cultural infrastructure that needs protection from the highest political decision-making bodies. Thank you.
Thank you, Johanna. Thank you for your insight. Marta, so going back to SDG funds.
Yes, well, I could not say it better, honestly, that Johanna just did, but also team Fackson, Julia, they all made the very, very valuable point that I can just echo. I mean, as I think said, and that was probably the central point of that I was making before about partnership. It really is related to the sustainability of it. It is really related to anchoring all these beautiful ideas and initiatives around collection and their role for the SDGs, for sustainable development, for the betterment of society in general, into national policies and plans. And that's, an important role also of the UN in fostering this and in providing that support that is needed. And the funding, the resources come afterwards and should be embedded into that. And the partnerships that would bring indeed, other actors. And I've seen in these days around the ANGA, the General Assembly's high level, there were lots of side events in which philanthropies and private sectors and so many different kinds of organizations that are beyond the sort of the key multilateral partners are actually playing a really important role in all these different areas of development. But again, I mean, at the center, the role of member states is super important in providing those framework. Now, in terms of how then we want to highlight the importance of this partnership with collections, but with anything we do at the fund and, in all our work, I think is really the struggle to measure what we do, to not reduce it to indicators only, but to really have some good measures of the value of the contribution that collections make. That in this particular case, we're speaking about this type of institutions, but in general, of every kind of programmatic interventions that we design for development, of the approaches that we choose, the strategies that we embark on. It's just the challenge of proving the value of something often intangible. So we all agree here there is an invaluable contribution, but how do we communicate it? Like what kind of like storytelling, what kind of reporting, what kind of engagements? So who are the actors that can be mobilized to do that? What are the voices that would be heard? And of course, the official reporting in the context, for instance, of SDGs, voluntary national reviews, or frameworks, again, that capture the value of culture and cultural institutions and collections into development. And I'm thinking, for instance, an example of Bilbao and how in urban sustainable development they were able to create this feedback loop with the work with the Guggenheim becoming a central to the development of Bilbao, and how they were able to again influence policies and the economics also of the cities. Of course, a country with a lot of resources, so it's very different for developing countries, but it's the concept of this feedback loop with policy, which I think is critical.
Thank you, Marta. So, so how do you see the future of those partnerships in general? So, with the cultural heritage and the funding sector. So, how do you see the future, and how do you want this partnership to be? How do you envision this partnership will be?
Well, I mean, I'm not an expert of cultural heritage institutions, so I'm not the best person on the panel to explain how this partnership, to see how this partnership should be. But as I said, we are there as the United Nations to support the government member states' vision for this, and to bring the voices of those who are least heard. So I love also the type of work that Tim was talking about. So for us to give visibility to these voices, to those who can benefit the most from the value of institutions from which they're normally excluded, or they can see the value of their heritage and cultures that need to be preserved, to be transmitted through these mechanisms. I think for us is, again, to be there to support these partnerships where there is a political will to prioritize them. And as the fund, we have again, we don't have an engagement right now. We don't have an investment area or a portfolio that is focused on that. But in this environment of very shrinking ODAs, is I don't want to create expectations that we're about to create one. But wherever there is a strong political will to make this central to the development plans, I believe our teams on the ground, through our colleagues from UN agencies and others through our RC system, will be there to support. And this would in turn create synergies with other partners such as the EU and other that have the resources as well to invest into this.
Thank you, Marta. And it appears you have an invitation. And in fact, there's an invitation to you and other organizations to collaborate with the UN, eGov, to conduct research and think about measuring the value and impact of initiatives and efforts around collections and heritage, more broadly speaking. So, and my question also goes to the other members of the panel. How do you envision this partnership in the future? So within collections-based organizations, the fundings, the initiatives that you lead. So how do you see this in the future? Open to all.
I think there's one, I'm reflecting a little bit on the project which I led, Digital Pacific, and it sort of was actually funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade as a development project and has been done so for 5 years. One of the challenges is they have is obviously as an agency like that, and with the purpose for that being engagement in the Pacific, which is very much a part of the Australian government strategy, political strategy. Development can't go on forever. And I think there's a really interesting challenge in terms of being in relationships. And I think Julia mentioned it earlier, we often get projects that are short term and we get them well funded and they look great and we do a website and we do a nice shiny brochure and then we all walk on to the next project. And I'm really fascinated in the idea of, again, like I said earlier, what is it to continue to be in a relationship that maybe isn't always exciting and we've got a big new thing, a shiny thing to point at, but what is it to be engaged and stay connected, even out of a conference like this? What is it to stay connected with individuals who have agency and control in different ways, and then you can always look back to them. And again, as I said earlier, my challenge for a major institution to say we're going to be in a relationship with the people of these places because we have their holdings, and we are going to do that as our core mission for perpetuity, that's a really powerful ongoing thing. And that doesn't require capex or opex, but it requires you to be willing to be present and to be heard and to take a call or to send an email or to share a drink or break bread with someone when you meet them. And I think that's a really human thing. I think, just watching your presentation about the Apoyo stuff, all of those interactions and all of those locations felt really powerful and wonderful for there. And I think to Marta's point around storytelling, I think we have the opportunity to reduce, to not be seduced by having one story that solves everything. There are many stories in many places, in multiple contexts and in multiple ways that are often small. We don't always have to track them and measure them, which we often do in research because you have to, justify that you've done the thing. But we have to be open to hearing them, to seeing them, and to paying attention to them, and then passing them on in our own ways. And again, to my point earlier, it's the passing on of the good things and the making sure we maybe don't pass on so many of the bad things that have got us to where we are. I think that's the really wonderful opportunity for us in partnership.
Thank you for this insight, Tim. Julia or Fackson, would you like to make some last contributions before we start to wrap up?
Well, not really. I think I agree with everything that Tim has said. But I mean, we live in an interesting time. We've got reduced funding overall. We've got a questioning of the whole bedrock of multilateralism. We've got member states pulling back, questioning institutions like ours more critically than they've ever done. And I think that, in a sense, is going to force us into building more innovative partnerships. They don't necessarily have to be huge, mega partnerships, but ones that address the needs of the people on the ground. I think if there is evidence to be produced as to what we are doing meaningfully on the ground, we will be aiming for that. And in a sense, if you will, the blessing, the silver lining out of all this murkiness is that we will be compelled to look anew at what we do and embrace communities much more, stakeholders at the grassroots level, and deal with them in a more meaningful fashion, particularly for institutions that deal in cultural heritage such as ours. So, I think that's where we're going if we had to come up with one or two scenarios for the future.
Thank you, Fackson. Julia, you were going to say?
Yeah, just to be honest, I think everything smart has been said at that point, but maybe just to share one personal story. When I joined NEMO, I had a conversation with the founder of NEMO, who at that point was quite old then, and he was telling me, and I was quite young, and he was telling me, you know what? It's all about people in this network. And I didn't understand what he meant, because we are a network of organizations, of museums or museum organizations. And over the years, I've been with NEMO for quite some time now, so I should know. I realized he was absolutely right. It's all about people. It's all about fostering those relationships and understanding the people and listening to them and keeping in mind what they have said, and things will emerge. I think the notion of emergence, which for networks like NEMO has really helped us so much in understanding where museums go, what their topics are, what their fears are, what the challenges are, also what their opportunities are. So that's maybe a very personal thing, but I think in the end we all come back to this understanding that it's all about people and all about listening to them.
Thank you, Julia. And what a marvelous conversation. And I always say people is patrimony. We are the patrimony, right? So it is about people. And it has been a wonderful conversation. And thank you so much. I think we could stay here for a very long time and would not even finish what we want to discuss. I also want to thank the questions. The questions will be noted, even though we did not have time to answer all of them. First and foremost, thank our panelists for your thoughtful insights and also practical examples for sustainable partnerships. I believe this conversation has been very inspiring and has demonstrated how strategic partnerships can advance sustainable development while also elevating the role of collections and collections-based organizations across sectors, and how we all, right, play a vital role in shaping a more sustainable future and the great potential ahead of us when we work together. And then the people, it's about the people, for the people. So let's stay connected. I thank again all the panelists for your time, for your thoughts, for your experience. And I'm sending back to José Luis. Thank you all.
Thank you, Beatriz. I'd like to join you in thanking our panelists for the insightful inputs, and a big thanks to our moderator. So to you, Beatriz, for conducting and focusing the conversation. I agree all the perspectives shared today. I mean, the reminders of the potential of partnerships to enhance the role of collections-based organizations for sustainable development, especially when we work together, we work with the people, reimagine the roles and the actions that heritage organizations can take up towards a better future for everyone. Many thanks for all the valuable points and insights shared here today.